So he had another recipe for another product that, he says, I gotta give this to Mark. So my mom came out and said, he wants to see you. And so I go in and I take a pen and paper and he starts telling me the recipe of this thing he called cella beans that he got inspired from this little village in Italy. And as I'm writing it, I'm going, okay. But then I started thinking, he's giving this to me because he's dying. And he doesn't want this thing to disappear. And so that was a very tough thing to write. And that realization, because that I'm the youngest son and that's your dad, that's your hero. And he's going. And a couple of days later, he was gone. So those notes, and I wanted to do something with it, but I wasn't ready to do it. I got too emotional with it.
What if the truth came in a gel cap and we could just pop it in our mouths and forget about it? Well, it doesn't. And we can't. But we can laugh in the face of reality while plotting our survival. Welcome to the Truth Tastes Funny podcast. I am your host, Hersh. And if my guests can handle the truth, so can you. Open wide, folks. Here it comes. With me today on Truth Tastes Funny is Mark Stephen Porro. Mark and I were just talking about some of the twists and turns that life takes and the role of humor in dealing with all of it. And that's certainly going to be part of our conversation. He has a book called A Cup of Tea on the Commode. Certainly his life has taken twists and turns from acting to being a caregiver for his mom. And we will cover all of it. And so welcome to the show, Mark.
Thanks, Hersh. Good to be here.
It's great to have you. Let's start with the title, A Cup of Tea on the Commode, because I don't think in our previous conversations, I don't think we talked about that. So no. Fill us in on the title of the book.
Well, my mother's favorite beverage was hot tea, skim milk, and no sugar. And it was funny because she was a coffee drinker before she was pregnant with me. I was her fifth child. And she switched to tea. And ever since, it had been hot tea, skim milk, and no sugar. So I've done my best to fill in for the hit the coffee market took. So I drink and grind as much of the Arabica beans as I can. So the story of A Cup of Tea in the Commode was me caregiving for my mom. And after this incident that happened in 2011, she could no longer walk. So we had to set a commode bedside. And sometimes Mother Nature took a little longer than was comfortable for either one of us. And so one day I kind of, as a joke, said, would you like a cup of hot tea while you're sitting there? And she said, sure. And I gave it to her and it was a hit. And so that became a morning staple for us. And I didn't think that was going to be the title, but it just kind of came out of, because I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it. I always had a kind of a history of recording family events, either in films or poems or greeting cards, or I started this other tradition, memory books. So when I was caring for my mom, our journey lasted 3.5 years. I took extensive notes and photographs and videos, and I wasn't sure what form it was going to take. When I decided on going memoir, I thought that was the best way to get my message out there, because some of my friends who were going through the similar thing got some benefit when I shared some of my stories. And so memoir was it. And A Cup of Tea on the Commode just kind of came out of a practical multitasking event from my mom. So it just kind of said, okay. So I thought that was perfect.
Well, what it says to me, and it's great to hear the origin of it, is a kind of a release of pretense, a sense of, hey, a cup of tea on the commode. If you're getting into a real life relationship, that you've stripped away the pretense and maybe even the niceties of it. Here you were living kind of a carefree bachelor lifestyle in LA. You were an actor. We'll talk about some of the projects you did in a minute, but talk about the pivot in your lifestyle when you made that change.
Well, at that time, I was in my mid-50s, and so my career was kind of slowing down. I was aging out of that. Unless you hit a certain level and have great agents and representatives, things are going to be a little slow. And at that time, I was also heading up a snack food company that my brother and I started to honor my dad in a snack food invention that was a kind of family secret up until I think we got into the stores in 1998 was the first time. So most of my time and effort was in LA creating this snack, and we had a nationwide distribution, and we had some really nice wins.
What was the snack? What was the snack?
We called it Grandpa Poe's Originals. It was a organic popcorn. My dad was a chemist, very clever guy, but he had 6 kids, and I think his motivation was fearing impending dental bills for the 6. So he wanted to keep us away from candy and junk food. So he invented a way to half pop popcorn. So popcorn became these little golden nuggets instead of a big fluffy white thing. And I still don't know he was a very clever guy and pretty inventive in a number of ways. I still have no idea how he actually said, okay, let me see what I can do with popcorn that's going to be different. But It was great. And now there's some copycat companies that do it. But when I was researching the market in the early 90s, because my nieces and nephews started sprouting out and they heard about this thing my dad called Nutrinuts. And I said, boy, what a shame that they didn't get to taste this stuff. So I asked my dad for the recipe. He had no interest in making it because it's a pretty messy and dangerous process to cook this stuff. And so I got the recipe and I almost burned down my apartment in LA. And that should have been a clue. But the stuff tasted great. And the family had the same reaction we did years ago when we were kids. And then I started using it as an introduction in Hollywood. I don't know if you knew Famous Amos's story.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So with the chips, so Nutrinuts were my thing. I'd give people a nice little jar of this fresh stuff, and it got me some work and certainly some exposure and stuff. So it was a good thing. So, but at this time we just lost our national distribution, and so that company was slowing down a bit. But we still had a lot of stores in the West Coast, and my brother handled sales on the East Coast. So we had enough of a business to keep it alive. But I got this call in 2011 that my mother was just kind of gave up on life. And so my brother said he put her to bed and she was kind of semi-comatose and called the doctor. And the doctor said, that's it. Never came to see her, just said, that's it. Cut off all meds and food and call hospice. So we all flew in, all the kids flew in. It was like we were on death watch. And
How old was she at the time?
She just turned 89. But she was very depressed, and I think she was living in the house we all grew up in. But we had some people in the house that were taking care of household duties and cleaning and cooking for her. At this point, she could still walk and pretty much function, but we had someone helping her with her personal hygiene. But she didn't like any of these people. My mother was she hid her emotions pretty well. So I think she was very depressed, though she didn't really show it to anybody. And I noticed the tension when I'd visit her a couple times a year. But this was, I guess, really serious. So once we got there, we hung out with mom. Again, we were on death watch. We had a priest come in and deliver the last rites. And my younger sister and I hung out with hospice because we didn't know how long mom was going to be with us, but we wanted to take care of her as much as we could.
Right.
So we were really good students, and we learned what we could from hospice to care for mom. And I think my mom started feeling the love returning to the house. And I have a chapter in the book called A Silent Scream. And I think this was her cry for help. She said, if this is my life, this is terrible, I'm out of here. And once we filled the house again with love and showed her that we wanted her to stick around, she snapped out of it about maybe 3 weeks later.
Wow. Let me stop you for a second, Mark. How many of the siblings kind of returned to the...
All of us were there. One lived in the same hometown, my one brother. I got 2 older brothers, 2 older sisters, and 1 younger sister. Mm-hmm. So my 2 brothers, one lived about 20 minutes away. The other one lived about a mile away. My one sister still lived in Jersey, and another sister lived in California, another one in Michigan. So we all came in, and I stuck around for probably a few months. So I was the one that hung out the longest. And I had a really good relationship with both of my folks. I was a pretty curious kid. So I got them to open up about things that they never wanted to open up about because they were like the depression babies and they didn't show emotion. They didn't share things.
What was your dad like in terms of his personality?
He was a very strict Catholic, very funny guy, pretty witty. He did tell a lot of corny jokes, but he was pretty witty. He was a chemist, so he was smart with math and science and things. A good ball player. He was a baseball coach. I was never good enough to make his team. He was not one of those guys where your kid's on the team. Out of the three boys, only one made his team. So baseball was an interesting issue with us, which I also discuss in the book. But he was pretty stubborn and independent. One of six kids also. My mom was an only child, also very stubborn and independent, but both of them were pretty funny people. And they didn't have a great marriage. They had a Catholic marriage, so they stuck it out until, death till they part. But they had some rough patches as we were growing up. So consequently, all the kids became very independent. So we, at one point, all of us had our own businesses. And I wasn't sure if it was because we were independent or people were afraid to hire us, but we were all somewhat entrepreneurial.
Were you close with one another?
Yeah, I think all the siblings are pretty good. Now that as we're getting older and politics and religion are splitting us in certain ways. But when we get together, my dad always got a kick out of it. He says, because he didn't enjoy that. He said it was really a fun to see how much we got along.
He wasn't close with his siblings?
Yeah, no, he had some issues, okay. I think. And it's a shame because for us, it was normal. We get together, we're all kind of goofy. But we're from Jersey, so everybody had their own opinions, very strong, and everybody knew better than anybody else. So
yeah,
it did cause some friction. But when I decided to take over my mom, everybody yielded, which was lovely because mom trusted me. My siblings also trusted me because once I guess I had that reputation. Once I set my mind to something, I give it my all. And so they were lovely, and it was a good thing. And when I asked my mom if she wanted me to do this, because she deserved better, and I knew I could provide better than the people we had there. And once she said yes, I said, just so you know, we're going to have fun. That was my goal. I wanted to make her laugh at least once a day, and she quite often made me laugh. So it was good. It's certainly challenging and stuff. Our journey lasted 3.5 years, but it was certainly eye-opening for me because I didn't have any children. I never married. And so my first kid was a 90-year-old, stubborn, grumpy lady. At that point, could barely remember my name. So,
well, that's a really interesting dynamic because, we're familiar with stories of people who, for whom the parent becomes the child, but it's typically those children have children of their own at that point. And so now it's like they're, my grandmother moved in with us toward the end of her life. She was mentally all there. She had just had a stroke and was not as, she was a bowling coach up until her mid 70s. And so, losing the ability to drive, get around, do her own thing. And she wasn't that old, was challenging.
Yeah.
But it was never a parent-child dynamic because her lack of independent movement was not, was not because of anything other than the physical.
Yeah.
So yeah. And so what had happened with your dad?
He died 14 years earlier. And I got this call from the same brother about my dad. He said he had heart disease. So he had this thing for about 6-7 years. And that's a horrible way to go. But he stuck through it because when he turned 80, he died at 82. When he turned 80, I was working on a state adaptation of a Fellini 8.5 movie in LA. And I got into my Italian roots. So I planned this trip to go to the little village where my grandfather came from 100 years earlier. Nobody had been back. Nobody taught us Italian. My grandfather came here when he was 10 and said, "That's it, I'm American." Never taught us.
I was going to ask about that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a shame. But we went, and I didn't know how bad my dad was. He was a trooper on the phone, but boy, when we got to Rome, he looked at a curb and had to really think about it before trying to step up and mount the curb. And I'm like, oh my God. But he wouldn't let me help him. He'd go, "I'm not an invalid." I'm going, well, okay. So I said, okay, you know what we're going to do? Don't apologize, because he would often apologize because we missed buses and trains and things. And I said, this is your trip. So we're going to go at your pace, and we're going to see more things. And we ended up seeing a lot of things, not things we necessarily wanted. We saw a lot of trains going by.
Yeah.
And a lot of buses that we missed going by. But it was great. And I shot a documentary of that. And when we got to this village, there's 200 people. And there was a rumor about my great-grandfather, who was the mayor of this town. And it was a bad rumor. And we cleared the family name because we found out he was not the bad guy, but the hero of the story.
Oh, well, that's really interesting.
Yeah, so that was something I didn't even imagine. I knew we were going to go there, and I told my dad, we got to be careful. We may get run out of town like my great-grandfather. But the house is still there, and the town historian knew the story. It was on the tip of his tongue about Natale Porro, who was the mayor in probably the 1880s, 1870s. And so we got a lot of family history from that gentleman, and they showed us the house. So that was just beautiful.
Is
And
that
then
in the book, Mark?
I have a chapter, a brief chapter about that trip. I will go into depth on the next book. We'll focus more on my dad, and we'll go more into it. But the documentary is online. It's called Chowchella, and it's actually on my website. The website for A Cup of Tea on the Commode is a cup of tea on the commode.org. There's a bonus materials or fun extras section where I have a lot of things that are in the book that people may be interested in checking out. And so one of them is the documentary.
That's great.
So, but he was great anyway.
Yeah, let me ask you this. So you're very family oriented, and you have, with both your parents, done these things, these kind of adventures, right? Was there a reason why you never married or had kids of your own?
No, other than I never dated a girl that I felt, I guess, compelled to marry and have children with. I had quite an adventurous life, and they're a lot of fun, but none of them said, "Oh yes, I would be a great mother." So I guess that's it. It would have been nice, but it's not. I guess it wasn't in the cards. Yeah. So I guess if we were to really look into it, I never dated a girl that I thought, oh, we're gonna marry. I mean, in college, I had a girlfriend that was. I went through. I call it three. Hopefully, she wouldn't hear this. 3.5 years of hell, and it wasn't until her mother said, "I don't know why you're putting up with this," that I said, "Oh my gosh."
Said to you, why are you putting up?
I got her mother on my side. And so I left it at that point. We're still friends. We keep in touch, but
yeah,
she's been married several times and all kinds of stuff. So it would have been a nightmare. But that's the only one I got close to, thinking about marrying and stuff like that. But that's the kid stuff. And,
well, I think if you had felt that, if you had been so compelled and said, oh my gosh, I'm with this woman and I just see it, I just feel it, you probably made it happen. But it's like, there's no, did your parents have any thoughts about that part of your life?
I don't think I ever talked about it with my dad. My mother may have briefly, but she didn't like any of my girlfriends.
Okay.
So it wasn't that. Even during this journey, I started dating a girl in California, and she came out to visit. And my mother was not all that excited. We're both at that point in our 50s, and my mother is like checking her out like a teenager. She's like, "Oh, I don't know if she's good enough for you." So that might have been my mom's attitude. But I have, out of my 5 siblings, only 2. What was it? Yeah, David. 3 of us don't have kids. 2 are married. One was married. She was the first divorce in our family. And my brother's been married for 30-something years, but they were never able to have children.
Oh, okay. And how often do you see each other now? Now that your folks are gone?
I live in France, so I have not been back since 2017. But my siblings just had a reunion last month. And so we did a Zoom. It was only going to be for a couple of days in upstate New York. So to come from France for a couple of days. So, I mean, I keep in touch with them. 3 of them have been here to visit, and a cousin, and actually my little sister's youngest daughter was just here a few weeks ago. So it's easy to get people to come to the south of France.
Yeah, we talked about that when we spoke initially, about the fact that you are in a place where, if people are looking to visit you and be someplace beautiful, you have that to offer. So it's
Yeah.
like, why would you necessarily go somewhere else? So tell me about, before we kind of circle back maybe to the book and to the plans for another book. Well, first of all, tell us a little bit about your acting career.
Well, my mother was, I have a chapter in the book called Our Champion of the Arts. So as kids, we all got involved with the ballet. All three sisters were there. My brother was like a little star,
Mhm.
and they were performing with the Royal Danish Ballet in Lincoln Center, New York, as kind of extras, but they had cool costumes. And I was like maybe 6 or 7 at the time. And I went backstage to see them. And some guy bursts through the door and says, "We need another little kid." And he makes eye contact with me. He says, you want to be in the show? And it was like a Hollywood movie. It was crazy. So I hesitated. I didn't know what to say. And he says, "We'll pay you." So I got paid $5 a show. I started out in Lincoln Center with
Yeah.
the Royal Danish Ballet. I got a great costume. I looked like a little Errol Flynn. And it was lovely. So then I started studying ballet, and my brother and I were the only two guys in the dance school. And it was great because we're surrounded by these girls. And it was like, those were my first crushes. But I retired. I had a problem with our dance instructor was a very strict Russian teacher, Irene Fokin, and she and I butted heads quite a bit. And so I retired at around, I think, 10 and then gave it up for that for a long time. And then when I was designing, I was very fortunate. I went to Ohio State, and at that time, I didn't even know industrial design existed, but I loved math and science, but I also loved the arts. So this married all three of those.
Yeah.
And it happened to be one of the best schools in the country at the time. So my first design job out of that, there was a girl, our receptionist was a model, and she said, "You should try modeling." And I thought, well, I don't really need to. I've got a good job and stuff, but I thought I'd give it a shot. And so I started modeling and then doing commercials in Columbus, Ohio. And I started entertaining the thought of doing the Hollywood thing. And then I auditioned for a movie that Paul Newman was in, not Paul Newman, Robert Redford actually was in this movie that was being filmed in Ohio. I had no idea what I was doing, but I got called in to read for a part. And I loved it. I was freaking out.
What was the movie?
It's just one word. Redford, it was about a prison. Redford was
Brubaker.
Might have been Brubaker.
Yeah.
He was the warden, and he heard all these bad things going on in the prison. So he became
Yeah.
a prisoner to check it out
Yeah.
from the inside. Yeah. So I auditioned for a coal miner. And so I got as grubby, I was pretty cleanly groomed and stuff like that. So I got as grubby as I could and tried to oh my gosh. He was pretty big at the time. Anyway, Peter Strauss. I was
Okay.
auditioning for his younger brother.
Oh, okay.
I didn't look the part. Anyway, but I said, boy, I love that. I love that thrill because at that point, I was really good in design, and I was fortunate to work with two really good companies. And I thought, I want to try something even harder.
Mhm.
So then I went out to LA, and I had a connection with an agent, and I also had a design job waiting for me because, again, I had a really good portfolio and good experience. So I had a job waiting for me. So I wasn't the desperate actor. I never waited tables or anything like that. I was lucky. And so my goal was to be a good actor. So I started studying from day one. And my goal was to get on a show like Hill Street Blues, because at that time, that was one of the top shows.
Right.
That put you in a certain category if you can make that show. Well, less than 2 years later, I was on Hill Street Blues. And
Wow.
that's how it started. So it was good. I did a lot of TV in the mid late 80s was, I guess, my time. So I did a lot of TV, a couple of independent type films, you did theater also to try to get discovered. And I had some really good opportunities. I was up for a series regular, and the whole audition process was just a disaster. If you don't have a good agent, it's really tough. You got to really hustle on your own, which I didn't mind doing, but it just seemed to be kind of
Yeah.
unfair because you have other people who were not good actors that didn't study, and they hook up with somebody, and all of a sudden
Right.
So, but I did, and then in Hollywood, you get to certain role levels. You don't want to go back. You don't want to backslide. So you say,
Right.
okay, I'm not going to do these very small parts. And then my agent called me one time. He said, they're replacing a pilot on Castaway with Tom Hanks, and Robert Zemeckis is directing it. Would you want to read for that? And I was in the throes of my snack food company, so I didn't
Right.
need it. But I thought, yeah, I mean, Tom Hanks and Robert Zemeckis, they're okay. They're up and coming. And so
And there are not many people in that movie.
right. Well, there's certainly not many people that died early on, but
Right.
So the guy, I had to look kind of like the guy I was replacing, but what they do in the movies, and I guess in anything else, he was established. He had one line to Tom Hanks. The rest of the movie is me, but you wouldn't know it because I wasn't allowed to turn to the camera.
Okay.
And so what was cool is Zemeckis, the crash sequence was a 3-day shoot, and you're in the head of the plane. So he did the whole choreography.
Yeah.
But before I got the job, the producer, I had to look like the guy. So I passed that thing, and I had to be a union actor, and I had that. So then he takes me outside and says, listen, if we hire you, you're going to be in a thing we call a gimbal. So it's going to be a roller coaster for 3 days. Can you handle that? And I said, I dated a French girl for 7 months. I can handle anything. So this is why I'm in France, because I got them laughing, and I knew I had the gig. So I did it, and you're working with Tom Hanks and Zemeckis, and Spielberg was on the set 2 of the days I was there because he was producing it. And it's just lovely. So after I got done with that, and I still make money off of that. That was probably my biggest money day. So
that's great.
1999, so 25 years. And we're still making good money. And I've got a nice pension coming, I think mostly because of Castaway. And it was like, so after that, I told my agent, any small part in a big movie, because it was absolutely lovely. The pay was great. The food certainly was good. And the experience was a lot of fun. So, and Tom Hanks is as nice as everybody says he is. He's just,
that's great. That's great to hear. And so now, are you working on the new book, on the dad book?
I have, I think I had those 8 days with my dad, and I took extensive notes during that. Again, I didn't know what I was going to do with it, but I was with him almost 24/7. And so, and we shared stories, and really just very cool stuff. And he knew I was doing the snack food company. So he had another recipe for another product that, he says, I got to give this to Mark. So my mom came out and said, he wants to see you. And so I go in, and I take a pen and paper, and he starts telling me the recipe of this thing he called cella beans that he got inspired from this little village in Italy. And as I'm writing it, I'm going, okay. But then I started thinking, he's given this to me because he's dying. And he doesn't want this thing to disappear. And so that was a very tough thing to write. And that realization, because that I'm the youngest son, and that's your dad, that's your hero, and he's going. And a couple of days later, he was gone. So those notes, and I wanted to do something with it, but I wasn't ready to do it. I got too emotional with it. So 14 years later, this thing with my mom happened. So again, I took extensive notes. So the last draft before I handed it into the publisher, I cut out about 4,000 words. It was quite a chunk, because some of those stories seemed to fit better with my dad's story. And so a lot of it's written. I've got to I have the goal of September to sit down and put it all together, because I have tons and tons of notes, and I have some chapters that are very close. Of course, with your experience and stuff, you can always do better. So I always want to go through it. And
do you have a title yet?
I do. The one I'm playing with right now, because my dad loved to play on words. So his snack food, the flavor, he called it slightly unsalted.
Mm-hmm.
So not heavily salted, not unsalted, slightly unsalted. So that's what I called it. And usually people got a big kick out of that.
I like it, yeah.
Sometimes in the stores, people wouldn't understand it. And I got to a point where I said, you're too dumb to eat my food. So
and it fits in a little bit with the fact that a cup of tea on the Commode is also about a kind of beverage, and the slightly unsalted, it feels like it's about food.
Yeah.
And
that's also a
little
bit of his personality also. So
I love it.
And then I had several books in mind. So I wrote a screenplay about the Italian. I mean, I did the documentary, but I also wrote a screenplay about our Italian trip. And then I also have the story of all the history of the snack food company that I went through. And then the 8 days with my dad. And those were going to be all separate books at one point. And then I thought, you know what? I think I have, because I have the ending where all those 3 things came together in this mountaintop village in Italy. And because I brought samples of the snack food with me to Italy to have the people in that village try something that my dad made. And they happened to grow popcorn in that village. So
Oh,
it all seemed to come together. So I think those will be all those three stories will come together in one book.
that's
That's
great.
slightly
So
unsolved.
there's a lot of that going on for you. Is there another business venture or any of that that appeals to you or that you're looking for beyond, let's say, the books?
Well, I have a number of people that have wanted to talk about making the cup of tea in the Commode into a film. And some of my Hollywood contacts and things like that. But I know how Hollywood works, and I'll probably be dead and buried before that would ever happen. So I'm not that excited. But I have a friend who is a casting director who actually cast me in a movie years and years ago, and he's all excited. He loves the book and story, so he says we got to do this. And I said, well, if you get me Meryl Streep, I'll get interested. And
Yeah.
because Meryl Streep's from Jersey, and she did caregiving for her boyfriend John Casals at the time.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah. Of
she
course.
would relate to this story, but getting it to certain people is tough. He said he sent a book there and no response yet. So it's tough to get it to certain people. So that's why I'm not that excited. Writing, I have full control,
Yeah.
or as much as possible until you hand it over to your editors and stuff. But so I'm more excited about writing the books, and the response to this one has been lovely. It's the sales are nice. The reviews have been fabulous, and I've won, I think, 7 literary awards so far for my first
Wow.
book, which is very cool. And so I think more are coming. And but I've get notes. I didn't know what I was. You pour your heart and soul into something. You don't know how the world's going to respond to it. But
Yeah.
they've been absolutely lovely and it's resonating. And especially with people from my hometown who I haven't been in touch with since probably over 50 years. And a lot of them, we're all reconnecting again, and they're asking me to say hi to my sister and brother and things like that. So I'm like the
Mhm.
conduit now, which is kind of my purpose, I think, because with documenting family history, I don't want that stuff to disappear. And these relationships are all starting to blossom again. And I had I don't even know them, but they're from my hometown, and she said, I read your book. I'm taking care of my mother. She's 95. And I read your book, and then she writes
Right.
back, and she goes, my mom's now 96, and I'm reading your book again because I find it helpful. And then she wrote, and this is about a month ago, she said, Mark, my mother died 2 weeks ago.
Oh,
And I want to tell you, the humor and the stories you shared helped me through it. And I'm like, that is just beautiful. And I never imagined that. You hope, I guess, people will like it and enjoy it and be entertained by it. But to get that kind of reaction, I've had a few people like that share it's heartwarming and I guess heartbreaking at the same time, but definitely humbling. And so that's I guess my new thing. So no kids, but stories that will make people, I think, smile and hopefully be inspired to take care of their loved ones.
Thanks so much for tuning into Truth Tastes Funny. If you enjoyed the experience, please leave a 5-star review and share this podcast with your friends.